Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, how are you? It's a bright, sunny September day, which of course has put me in a terrible mood. But how are you, Kieran, apart from chipper, I'm guessing?
I am chipper, which, given how little sleep I had last night, I still think is quite an achievement, because I was minding my own business and then something happened in the world of football finance, which I think it's fair to say has kept me moderately occupied over the course of the last 12 hours or so.
Well, I think I know what you're talking about, Kieran. It mildly annoyed me. It didn't keep me up at night. Were you just worried about all the work you've got to do today, or was your mind racing about what had gone on? Were you on the phone to high-powered lawyers? 5 Live at 3 o'clock in the morning? Did you keep the Baroness awake, asking for her take on the story?
Yeah, I'm not very popular with her because we are binge-watching the programme. I don't know whether you've seen it. It's called Slow Horses with Gary Oldman.
It's
brilliant.
Fantastic.
So we just caught up on that, and I think the new series starts today or tomorrow.
Today.
So we had 3 episodes of the third series to work on last night, and I'd said I'm just disappearing for a couple of interviews, and I came back and she wasn't there.
Yeah, it's written by an old friend of mine, Will Smith.
Oh wow!
As he always says, not that Will Smith, because he's Will Smith is, well, he used to be a stand-up comedian, but he used to really baffle people, because this Will Smith is 6'4", blonde, and very, very posh. That isn't exceptional. I mean, Gary Oldman, the character he plays, is so good that he's given up acting full stop, because he doesn't think there'll be another character that will match the one that he's playing. So, the story we're talking about, Kieran, because it is Newsday, and the story we're talking about will, of course, have champagne corks popping in Leicester, but I imagine in Everton and Nottingham Forest it will have heads being scratched, and I should think it will also have Man City fans putting their feet up on the sofa and lighting a large cigar, because if the Premier League gnaws this technicality up, you can't see any way, shape or form they're going to be able to get Man City on 115 charges.
I think there will be a lot of reflection by many parties. For people not familiar with the press release which came from Leicester City Football Club last night, Leicester City had been charged by the Premier League for a potential breach of the PSR rules, which allows them to lose a maximum of £105 million over a 3-year period. Leicester were significantly in excess of that. But in order for that to be the case, the Premier League can only charge clubs who were members of the Premier League. And we just take sort of a little timeline. I think it was in 2023, what Leicester City did was that they changed their financial year end from the 31st of May to the 30th of June. Perfectly legal. Palace have done this in the past. Manchester City have done this in the past. Liverpool have done this in the past. It's one of those things that happens. And you sometimes wonder why it happens. And nobody really thought that much of it. Leicester City were relegated at the end in May 2023. And I do think the dates are quite important. And then there is an annual general meeting in the summer for both the EFL and the Premier League. And the day before that happens, for people not familiar with the Premier League is a members club, and each member has effectively an entry card in the form of a share in the Premier League. So Leicester transferred its share in the Premier League. I think it went to Luton Town, and it did this on the 13th of June. Leicester's financial year end is now the 30th of June. The Premier League have said, we think that you have exceeded the loss limits for the 3 years to the 30th of June 2023, to which Leicester's reply was, well, we'd given up our share 2 weeks earlier. So therefore, we're members of the EFL, and therefore, you cannot sanction us. You cannot charge us. So this has gone to a hearing. Our good friend, Nick DeMarco, has been absolutely brilliant guest, and he is extremely good at what he does. He was one of the people representing Leicester City, and the commission, which looked into whether or not this wasn't actually a charge by the Premier League. This was to establish whether or not the Premier League had the jurisdiction to charge Leicester City Football Club concluded, no, you can't, because how can you, as the Premier League, charge a member of the EFL? You may also remember that about 6 months ago, the EFL tried to impose some form of financial stroke business plan sanctions against Leicester City, and Leicester City managed to prove that Leicester City were not part of the EFL, and therefore neither governing body of the professional game in English football can, under the current set of rules, deal with a club that has just been relegated and presumably, potentially, has also just been promoted from one organisation to the other, from Premier League to EFL Championship or from EFL Championship to Premier League. And everybody's just sat down and gone, wow, what a really poorly set of rules that have been drafted.
Mm. I mean, it's surprising that these rules are so poorly written, Kieran, because we had a similar situation, didn't we, 10, 15 years ago with QPR when they got relegated from the Premier League and then avoided any charges for them smashing what were the profit and sustainability rules back then. How many points do you think Leicester would have been deducted had this case reached its conclusion?
Well, if you read the verdict in the Nottingham Forest points deduction, which was effectively the most recent one that we've dealt with, the rules appear to indicate that if you have a breach of rules, then it's going to be 3 points. And on top of that, for every £6.5 million over the limit, you're talking about another 1 point. So Leicester were, I think they were around about £22-24 million over the limit, according to the Premier League calculations. And, of course, Leicester could have appealed those. So I think we would have been looking at a 7-point deduction this season. And had the EFL been able to apply these rules, I think it would have been a higher points deduction because the EFL tariff is that much higher. But the EFL, as we've established, was unable to take any action against Leicester City because Leicester was operating in the twilight zone of football. It is neither one, it was twixt and twain.
I've got no particular animus against Leicester City, Kieran, I have to say, although obviously as a club that might be in and around Palace in the league this season, I wouldn't be unhappy at them seeing 7 points being deducted. But there is no doubt here. I mean, no one denies that they did breach the P&S regulations, and no one denies that they have effectively exploited a loophole. And yes, we acknowledge that they had some very clever lawyers, but it does seem to be a loophole that could be exploited by other clubs as well, because if you breach the rules, you get relegated. It seems no one could do anything about it. So you might as well breach the rules, and if you don't get relegated, deal with whatever issue comes next season when you've got more money because you stayed in the Premier League.
It does certainly change the dynamics. I was in contact with a lawyer last night, which again didn't particularly go down well at home. But his comment to me, and I think this is a valid one, he said, you say loophole, I say rule. And he says, these ultimately are the rules which have been designed by the Premier League. I went through the Premier League finances this morning. The Premier League's an expensively run organisation. It had its own legal bills last year was somewhere in the region of £30 million. If you take a look at its payroll costs, the average cost of employing somebody at the Premier League is £141,000. And for £141,000 average, I would be expecting a level of competence which has not been delivered on the basis of what we've just seen here. You also have to ask yourself, if the EFL and the Premier League can have a holistic approach to transfer fee compensation. So if there's an argument about a transfer fee, there's an independent body which deals with all transfer fees. The Premier League have signed up to it, the EFL have signed up to it, and they accept the verdict. Well, why is there not a similar body in relation to financial fair play, PSR rules, whatever you want to call them, which deals with all 92 clubs? From what I understand, one of the parties is a lot keener for this to have been created than the other. And you have to ask yourself, why the reticence, why the arrogance coming from one of our bodies which are in charge of football? So it's messy. I think it's hugely embarrassing for the Premier League, who have consistently said, look, we're really good at running our own house, and therefore we don't need an independent regulator. It certainly weakens their opposition to the regulator. Not, however, the regulator would have been involved in something like this, because the regulator's remit is actually very narrow. But in terms of sort of the general positioning of opposition, it makes things very difficult. If we take a look at clubs that have breached EF rules, historically, we've got QPR, as you mentioned, Bournemouth and ironically, Leicester. They all breached the EFL's FFP rules in about 7 or 8 years ago, and they were all given fines as opposed to points deductions, because, again, the Premier League says we refuse to accept points deductions which would have been put forward by the EFL. So again, it's the arrogance of the Premier League as an institution, which I think reflects poorly on the organisation.
It's a very pleasing image, Kieran, of I can see a kind of carry-on film split screen thing where you're lying in one bed in your silk pyjamas, and there's a lawyer up in London lying in another bed in his silk pyjamas being fed grapes by an acolyte while you discuss Leicester City on the phone. And I understand the lawyers view this, they're exploiting the fact that the regulations are badly written. But in the same way that, yes, technically, Declan Rice, you could argue, should have been sent off on Saturday, but also the Brighton player who kicked him up the arse while he was doing it should have been sent off as well. So everybody knows what the spirit of this rule is for. Everyone knows why it's there. And yes, Leicester technically correct. But, if I'm a Forest fan, because, one of the arguments about Forest was their accounting period and how much that overlapped. Same with Everton. You can understand why they're furious. And also you can understand, as I mentioned beforehand, Man City fans must feel that's game over. City's lawyers, I assume, are even better than the lawyers Leicester can afford. There's absolutely no chance of that being a fair hearing, is it now, really?
I think you raise very valid points. There is an overriding rule in the Premier League constitution that members should act in utmost good faith towards both the Premier League and other clubs. Now, I've been busy. I asked my lawyer friend to define utmost good faith, and we're fortunate that we do have a good cohort of secret football or secret sports lawyers to take opinions from. And clearly this would not be somebody that would be involved in the Leicester case, because that would be,
of course,
that would be absolutely inappropriate. He said it's a vague, nebulous, abstract term. It's very, very difficult to enforce, because how can you enforce something which you can't define? And whilst all the focus will be on Leicester, we have just come out of a period of 3 or 4 months in football in which, and we'll come to this in more depth when we talk about the transfer market, where there's been transfers of convenience, where there have been real estate property sales to effectively to yourself. We've got the unusual issue with regards to who is owning Chelsea Women's Football Club, and was there a profit on that particular sale? And if so, how has that profit been dealt with? The Premier League has still not given an answer with regards to Chelsea's £76 million worth of profits from property sales in 22-23. So the focus is on Leicester, but there must be a huge in-tray. And I do have sympathy. I'm not bashing the Premier League here for the sake of it. There must be a huge in-tray at the Premier League in relation to all of these other issues, plus Manchester City, plus there's a separate issue in relation to Everton and the stadium and the borrowings there. So it's not football anymore, is it?
No. Finally, Kieran, and as you say, we've talked a lot about clubs changing their accounting period, and it is quite standard practice. In this case, though, do you think Leicester did it? You think some clever forward-thinking person at Leicester said it might be a good idea to move this to when we're not in the Premier League?
It is fortuitous as far as the club is concerned. Did it involve an element of foresight that the club was struggling in 22-23 and this was seen as a backstop? If somebody has done that, then they are within the rules to do so. I'd be giving them a bonus.
Foresight, that's exactly the word I was looking for, Kieran. Well done, thank you. You mentioned transfer window, despite it got quite embarrassing for Sky at one stage on last Friday, Kieran, because their little graphic of Premier League spending for about 8 hours, it had Sam Johnston moving from Palace to Wolves or wherever he went as their only transfer. And then in the end, they had about 4. So it seems anecdotally that it wasn't a particularly exciting transfer window, Kieran, but is that the case? And again, of course, we should point out that the Championship window and the League Two, League One window, there were plenty of transfers going on in those divisions. And of course, we always focus on the Premier League. But in general, how exciting was this transfer window?
For me, I thought the most amazing thing was that Birmingham City, in the third tier of English football, spent £15 million.
Yeah.
Well, that's incredible. And I've been contacted by Birmingham fans and also fans of other clubs in League One and say, is this within the rules? Well, under the rules for both League One and League Two, there is something called football fortune, which says every £1 put in to clubs by owners in the form of shares rather than loans, you can spend that £1 on players, in effect. So it looks as if Knighthead, who are the new owners of Birmingham City, who do appear to be very ambitious, they clearly have provided significant funding. It's got an awful lot of attention. It's certainly boosted, interest in the Blues and so on. For me, that was the most fascinating thing as far as the market was concerned. In relation to the Premier League itself, the overall level of spending was £1.9 billion. That is the fourth highest in history.
Wow.
And people will only tend to focus on what's happened in the last year or two, which were the number one and number two. So why is spending down compared to previous years? I think we have to look at the why factors. First of all, there is the issue of PSR. There's no doubt that it's caused complications. It caused complications before the 30th of June, where we started to see the swaps that were non-swaps in terms of players. There were 6 clubs, potentially 7 clubs in the Premier League who were in genuine danger of breaching the PSR rules, and they just so happened to sell clubs between themselves. It's like having a giant WhatsApp group between 6 or 7 clubs and, I'll show you yours and if you show me mine mentality. And there's been a really good article in The Athletic by Phil Buckingham, who has said, okay, we started the Premier League. Let's take a look at the 11 players who were involved in these deals. And they haven't been playing a lot of football. Newcastle signing what appears to be a 4th choice goalkeeper for £20 million, who they now appear to be trying to put out on loan. Again, within the rules. And it's the rule book that you have to question rather than how the rule book has been applied necessarily by clubs, because they will do what's best for themselves. It's self-interest rules. So we had the PSR issue. We've seen a substantial application of the loan system as well. And we now have this somewhat strange situation that Chelsea are paying Raheem Sterling £200,000 a week to play for Arsenal, who intuitively you would think, aren't they rivals in the Premier League? That seems strange. We've got a similar, of course, relationship between Jadon Sancho and Manchester United and Chelsea. So it's difficult to get a hold on. Last year and the previous year, we had, first of all, the Chelsea takeover and then the emergence of the Saudi Pro League as catalysts into the market. And the way that the transfer market works is, if all of a sudden the Saudi Pro League comes from nowhere and spends £200 million with Premier League clubs, that means that Premier League clubs have got £200 million to spend. Even though they only spend 90% of it, they spend £180 million. Well, that means more clubs have just received £180 million. They spend 80 or 90%, and you get this ripple effect. Now, we didn't really see that over the course of this summer in terms of somebody coming in and disrupting the market. And that, I think, was a contributory factor, along with the other issues that we mentioned, to what was deemed to be an unexciting transfer window. As a Brighton fan, I wouldn't have said that. But we've had the summer of all summers.
Yeah. Just a couple of points off the back of that, Kieran. So I want to talk about a game where the transfer market was busted records, which is in women's football. But first of all, Birmingham, one of the players they brought in was from Fulham, 2 divisions above them. So presumably they're not only able to afford big transfer fees, but big wages. And secondly, Palace brought in Chalobah on loan from Chelsea for a year. And we've talked about on loan deals with options. The option here was absolutely no option to buy at the end of that season, which I thought was a very interesting one. It's not one that you often come across. It's no option. There's no chance that you can make a bid for this player at the end of the loan period. Is that common? Is it more common than I think it is?
I think the option and the obligation to buy are both relatively new elements within the market. It's been introduced as a sort of a protection for both the selling club and the buying club. There's nothing to stop Trevor Chalobah having a fantastic season for Palace, and on the back of that, Palace putting in a bid. I know when looking at another Chelsea defender, Colwell came to Brighton 2 seasons ago. Brighton tried to buy him at the end of the season, and Chelsea said no. So that's the position they're in. So it's not overcommon, and certainly again, if we look at the position when Ben White went from Brighton to Leeds, there was no option to buy for Leeds at that. So the option to buy is normally in somewhat slightly restricted circumstances. I think you raise a very valid point with regards to Birmingham City and wages. And whilst it will be another 20 months before we get the results published, I'm already sharpening my Birmingham City spreadsheet for the wages to revenue calculation for that particular entity.
I'm not sure how you sharpen a spreadsheet, Kieran, but it's another pleasing image. So the lawyer's being fed grapes and you're sharpening a spreadsheet while you're having your chat in bed. I should point out, as a Palace fan, there are many things to stop Chalobah having a fantastic season at Selhurst Park. Don't underestimate our ability to ruin things.
Want a website with unmatched power, speed, and control? Try Bluehost Cloud, the new web hosting plan from Bluehost, built for WordPress creators by WordPress experts. With 100% uptime, incredible load times, and 24/7 WordPress priority support, your site will be lightning fast with global reach. And with Bluehost Cloud, your sites can handle surges in traffic no matter how big. Plus, you automatically get daily backups and world-class security. Get started now at Bluehost.com.
It's getting harder and harder to find great food at a reasonable price. Why settle for a smaller version of the real thing just to make it affordable? With Popeye's 3 for $5 special, you get the same great signature chicken we always serve. Crispy, juicy, hand-breaded chicken tossed in Louisiana spices and cooked to perfection. Don't settle for a mini meal. Come into Popeye's today and get 3 pieces of our signature chicken for just $5.
Love that chicken from Popeyes.
At select Atlanta, Georgia area restaurants. Terms apply.
As we mentioned, Kieran, or as you hinted, there was a record amount of money spent on transfers in the women's game so far this summer.
Yes, so it's more than doubled. It's gone up to £5.2 million. Some people might be a bit sniffy about that, but if you take a look at, let's set Birmingham aside, you take a look at the level of spending in National League and League Two, and all of a sudden, I think that's where we should be benchmarking interest in the women's game. Now, of that 5.2 million, again, that's a global figure, but then there are not that many leagues in the women's game which do actually have formal transfer fees. I think the highest amount of spending came from Arsenal. They paid £210,000 for a player, but there has been an increase. And I think it's the direction of travel that we should be focusing on. We're hoping to have somebody from one of the women's teams come on the show in a few weeks, and we'll go through sort of the ambitions under Nuco and how they expect to see the women's game continue to develop.
It's always nice, Kieran, when a father and a son can have a little bonding moment. Ed and I shared many such bonding moments over the weekend, throwing things at the TV every time a football commentator or pundit made a dreadful Oasis pun. There were many, and Alan Smith, I'm looking at you in particular. I don't think I should name the commentator because Noel Gallagher was in the crowd at West Ham and they started talking about, could you get a ticket? No, I couldn't get a ticket. Well, it's easier to get a ticket for West Ham than Oasis. Yes, it's easy to get a ticket for West Ham and Oasis. And Alan Smith said, but I am on a waiting list, to which the commentator said, well, if Sally can wait, so can Alan, at which case both Ed and I, we walked towards the TV waving our fists with imaginary pitchforks. But it has led, Kieran, the whole Oasis ticket price business to a lot of talk about dynamic pricing and some concerns about whether it could become common practice for football ground. Because when, if you think of the demand for Oasis tickets must be matched by the demand on a weekly basis for Liverpool tickets, Man United tickets, Arsenal, Tottenham tickets, and so on and so forth.
Yes, and I think it was one of the clubs in Spain who's just introduced such a system. For people not familiar with dynamic pricing, what it is that in real time, you will have algorithms which are determining the level of demand for a particular product. And for anybody who's not based in the UK and or is not an Oasis fan, what happened was that the Oasis gigs for next year were announced. They were originally, I think, £150 to stand at Wembley. And people have been waiting 5 or 6 hours. And all of a sudden, the price went up from £150 to £350. And people go, oh, hold on, I entered this queue in good faith 5 or 6 hours ago, and I could just about afford a pair of tickets, but they want to see Oasis, and all of a sudden you've moved the goalposts. Now, dynamic pricing happens in many, many other industries, and those industries sometimes impact upon football fans. So again, I can only give a personal example. When Brighton were drawn away to Roma in the Europa League, tickets from Gatwick and Stansted and Heathrow to Rome, they went through the roof in exactly the same manner.
Oh, okay. Wow.
And that's quite common in hospitality. And I think you've experienced it sort of indirectly as far as the entertainment industry is concerned, because is it the case that Oasis are playing in Edinburgh, which coincides with the Edinburgh Festival next year, and there's been a spike in hotel prices? That's dynamic pricing.
Yeah. There's not just a spike in the hotel price. The hotel rooms have all sold out already.
Wow.
So that's going to have a massive knock-on effect on accommodation for people going up to the Edinburgh Festival. Less so the performance, but certainly people going up to watch shows. But sorry, just on that, the airport thing, Kieran, before we carry on with this. So that idea that, how many Brighton fans would have gone to Rome? 3,000?
Yeah.
So would somebody at Gatwick and Heathrow and Stansted have gone, right, Brighton are travelling to Rome, let's put the prices up? Or would it be that the demand was such that an algorithm automatically put the prices up because so many Brighton fans tried to book at the same time?
It's the latter.
Okay,
and it always happens when we just had the UEFA draw for matches this season, and there'll be fans from Liverpool and City and Manchester United and all of those other clubs. They'll be wanting to go to away matches because of the passion that fans have, again, which is sort of linking it into one of our further stories. And airlines are reaping the benefits, because under normal circumstances, how many people want to travel to Athens in early December, midweek from the UK? It tends to be relatively low.
Yeah.
So the algorithms spot the increase in demand, and as the number of seats available declines, the price of the remaining seats starts to rise significantly. And that's when, again, one of the great things I love about being a football fan, it's the resourcefulness of football fans. One of my mates went to Rome via Inverness, and he did it for 110 quid.
Well, yeah, okay, fair enough.
So that was fantastic. How is this going to impact upon the football industry? Well, this is not me being xenophobic in any way, shape, or form, as far as I'm concerned. We now have a significant amount of US investors, and they're investors rather than fans, and I'm not criticising for them. It's a business. We've now got a significant number of US investors in the English game, in the Premier League. Dynamic pricing is what you see in Super Bowl. It's what you see in the NBA. It's what you see in MLB and so on.
Right.
And therefore, that is the norm. The clubs will be reluctant to be seen to be introducing it. They will be trying to work out, how do we manage this? And the way that they're managing this is as follows. This is a topic which we've discussed on quite a few occasions. If you are a fan of a club and you cannot make it to a home game, you're a season ticket holder, whilst they don't want us as season ticket holders, many clubs these days, getting rid of us is slightly more complicated than that. But now you have to resell your ticket via the club. And what happens is the club buys back the ticket from you, and it says, you're paying 40 quid a match. We will refund your 40 quid if we can resell the ticket. And what they will then do is they will then use dynamic pricing and they will sell your ticket for 70 quid, for 80 quid to, I call them day trippers. That's not a derogative term. It's for those fans who cannot get to see their club or the opposing club on a week-by-week basis. It's a big event for them. They're more likely to spend money on merchandise. They're more likely to buy a program. They're more likely to get to the ground early and leave the ground late because, hey, I'm going to this iconic venue, as far as I'm concerned. So that's what we're seeing at present. Quite often what the clubs will also do is that they will wrap up your season ticket, especially if you've got a pair of them, they'll wrap it up in some form of hospitality deal where you go to a warehouse before the match, you get your photograph taken with a former player, sit down, pint and so on. Somebody comes in, does a bit of hospitality, entertaining, and all of a sudden your 40 quid, Kevin, becomes 300 quid because it's now hospitality. So that's what clubs are doing. Do they want to introduce dynamic pricing? Yes, they do. Let's be honest, it's not a big issue for Steve Parish or Tony Bloom because we don't have that type of fan base. But if it's Manchester United, if it's Chelsea, if it's Liverpool, if it's Manchester City, and so on, that's what they want to do.
Well, funnily enough, we've got an interview coming up tomorrow with Andy Payne, who's chair of the West Ham Independent Supporters Trust, about their concerns over a range of ticket price rises and concessions being removed. And that plays into this narrative of trying to encourage as many West Ham fans as possible out of the ground so they can free up seats for the day trip. And as you say, most of the day trippers, Kieran, most of them are West Ham fans who only have one or two opportunities to come to the game a season, but some of them are tourists and some of them are businesses in London who have 3 or 4 West Ham season tickets to give out the corporate hospitality. So this dynamic pricing is not something that's going to go away. We have 2 stories involving UEFA this week, Kieran. We're going to separate them with a Premier League story, so it's a little UEFA Premier League sandwich. But both the UEFA stories are quite significant in their own way. And the first one is about away fans.
Yes, and just so we try to always give a fair assessment of the Premier League and the EFL and the National League and UEFA, and sometimes we're critical and sometimes we're not. Here, hats off. UEFA has negotiated and has operated with FSE, Football Supporters of Europe, and there's now a cap for away fans as far as its competitions are concerned. You could separately argue that the cap is too high, but that's a separate discussion. So as far as the current season is concerned, the cap is €60 for Champions League, €40 for Europa League, and €20 for the Europa Conference. And that's going to decrease. And this is something I find a little bit strange. I don't see why these prices couldn't have been introduced this season as well. But next season, I like the direction of travel. It becomes €50 for Champions League, 35 for Europa League, and the conference stays at €20, which I don't think is unreasonable. I wouldn't have expected to see a further reduction. So I think Seferin is conscious. I know it's a common theme. Fans make matches. Fans convert an inert piece of architecture into a living, breathing organism, which is the atmosphere, all of those intangibles that we have within a football ground. And I think the away fans are a significant contributory factor to that. So it's good to see that, just as we have in the Premier League, there is an element of protection for them in terms of prices. Because let's face it, they're paying for catering, they're paying for hospitality, they're paying for flights, and they're paying for hotels as well.
It almost seems counterintuitive, Kieran, to believe that UEFA have an insight into how important football fans and away fans are, that increasingly some Premier League clubs are forgetting.
Yeah, I think, look, there are very good people at the Premier League, and there are very good people at individual Premier League clubs as well. The same applies to UEFA. It's not universal. I think there's many people at UEFA who appreciate that had it not been for football fans, UEFA would have lost its flagship competition because Super League would have been created.
Yeah.
And it was down to those fans. And and as you know, I'm not a fan of Chelsea, but here I will give praise to Chelsea fans. Chelsea fans who their club would have been a beneficiary of Super League, they said that doesn't tie in with our values, and hats off to every Chelsea fan who protested, and Manchester United fan and Liverpool fan as well, because they would have been the beneficiaries of that competition, and they say we want to be there on merit. I think UEFA is conscious that when it comes to selling its rights, in our interview with Andy Payne, he talks about Uli Hoeneß of Bayern Munich saying, we're more than a business.
Yeah.
And we want to attract people, and we want to be part of the greater good of football. And this is a little concession towards that, and fair play to UEFA.
Well, here's the Premier League meat in the UEFA sandwich, Kieran, or for our vegetarian friends. Here's the Premier League cheese for our vegan friends. Put whatever you want in the middle of the UEFA League sandwich. The Premier League is facing demands, Kieran, to increase its funding of referees. News that will get an ironic cheer from Arsenal fans this week, Kieran, I imagine, amongst any of them. I've actually really enjoyed Arsenal fans moaning about Brighton as much as Palace fans do. It's been great to have them on board. All we can do is respond. I just respond to all these texts and WhatsApps, but go, well, what can you expect? They're the media's favourite club. Everyone, of course, referees are biased against Brighton. Everyone has a rule. The Premier League make it so. But it's been great. I love one particular high-profile Arsenal fans going, I'm going to hate Brighton forever. It's like, well, it's nice the referee did it, but but I'm fair enough. I'm all for an irrational hatred of another football team. I don't know. This is a subject for another pod in itself, Kieran, but it seems that the media, after a couple of years of holding back on referee criticism, has decided the time has come to analyse every mistake again. And there have been some high-profile ones, let's face it.
There have. Yeah, as a former referee, I make mistakes all the time. And, I was refereeing at what would now be sort of tier 7, tier 8, whatever it was. I don't ever recall a match in which a player was perfect.
No, of course.
So that's the issue. But this is a story, and this has come from Matt Hughes in The Guardian. It's about the Premier League providing further funding to PGMOL. And we have been in touch with PGMOL. Yeah, we spoke to Maheta about the fast track scheme being introduced. There's a transition from players who are ending their careers into refereeing, which I think is something to be encouraged. The Premier League does provide funding, but I think there's a genuine concern that we're not getting enough people into the upper echelons of refereeing. I'm not saying it's a closed shop, but from a diversity point of view, you don't see any non-white faces. Certainly, as far as the Premier League is concerned, I appreciate we've started to make progress on the EFL with regards to that. And for those people that accusing me of being Mr. Woke, all that diversity means is the more people you have available, the bigger talent pool you have available to you, the better the quality of the product. In terms of whether it's referees or doctors or accountants or entertainers, doesn't matter what it is. So that's just economic logic. What we've also seen, and this is something which was found intriguing, is that there is now a concentration of referees from Yorkshire and the Northwest.
Oh, okay.
So if you take a look, if you actually take a look at the Premier, I think the Premier's got 21 referees on its sort of tier 1, which will tend to be the people they use. They occasionally use people from tier 2, and that can cause problems. If we take a look at Manchester United versus Liverpool, which took place on Sunday, well, the referee there was Anthony Taylor. Now, look, transparency purposes, I know Anthony. I have conversations with Anthony on whatever, and I think he's an excellent referee. He's from Wythenshawe.
Yeah.
Now, I just checked that, and before the match kicked off, there was already how can he possibly be objective? This was coming from Liverpool fans, and you understand why they might say that. I would never question a referee's integrity, especially as I understand Anthony's an Altrincham fan anyway, so he's not got any dog in the fight, and I thought he had a really good game as well. But if you've got greater geographical representation in terms of where the referees are coming from, it allows you to not have that as a problem. Because you can now have somebody from Cornwall, or you can have somebody from South London, or wherever it's going to be. So this can help the conspiracy theorists amongst fan bases. Refereeing's a bad enough job. It's a tough enough job as it is, without before the match people calling into question the integrity of the referee, simply because for some reason fans think that they've got a right to know which football team the referee supported when they were 14 years old, and so on, or they got an auntie that has got an Oasis album, so therefore must be biased towards Manchester City, and so on.
You only have to look at the referee's shirt, though, Kieran, to see that most of them are on the UEFA list or the FIFA list. So these are clearly good, qualified, skillful referees. It seems that we lost a lot of experience. We lost John Moss, Mike Dean, Martin Atkinson, all at the same time, which with hindsight was possibly a mistake. But I think also there's an issue, and this is why I said this is for another pod. There's an issue that I wasn't aware, but apparently every pundit has been telling us this, that the Premier League changed, or the rules were changed over the summer about the stopping of free kicks being taken quickly. I don't know if that's the case, but the pundits have decided that is the case, and they've decided that referees weren't given enough time to get used to it. The trouble is, it's like we saw Cucurella at Chelsea Palace on Sunday twice kick the ball away, quite some significant difference, and wasn't yellow carded either time. The fact is, of course, that we haven't got a leg to stand on because Will Hughes should have been sent off. So he should have had a second yellow card as well. So we can all find. I quite like the referee, the Brentford Palace game's first game of the season, made what most people thought was a mistake and said to the Palace captain after the game, I think I probably made a mistake there. I'm really sorry. And that's, as far as I'm concerned, that should be the end of it.
Yeah. This
is a story we need to keep an eye on because I'd be interested to see what people think the Premier League throwing money at PGMOL is going to earn. The second UEFA story, Kieran, has gone under the radar. I know I use that expression a lot, but it strikes me that this is quite a significant story, Kieran, especially when it comes to your favourite club, Chelsea.
Yes. If you take a look at the UEFA handbook, I wouldn't recommend that, by the way, for anybody, unless you are a nerd. It does specifically state that related party transactions, especially in relation to non-footballer assets, may or may not be allowed when it comes to UEFA's version of cost control. Now, this does bring into question, therefore, what's happened at Chelsea in relation to 2024. UEFA now assess clubs on a calendar year basis. So Chelsea have qualified for Europe in 24-25. They've got to prepare accounts to the 31st of December 2024. And as part of that, it looks as if they've sold the women's team to another party of the group at a profit. It looks as if they've also made some more property sales to another part of the group as a profit. Are these allowed? A cursory glance at the UEFA handbook would suggest probably not, but it isn't a definitive wording. That's in the EFL, you definitely can't. In the Premier League, you definitely can. But for UEFA, I think it could go either way. So it will be interesting to see this. And I've already seen some people say it's not in Chelsea's interest to be playing in the Europa Conference this year because they could end up on the wrong end of a charge. We'll wait and see.
Oh, okay. We've been following the Inverness Caledonia Thistle story, Kieran, with some close attention, and it looks like there's good news this week.
Yes, I think there was certainly a genuine chance of administration.
Yeah.
When we'd done the analysis of the finances, the club had a lot of debts. I mean, to be fair, some of the loans had come in from people who were not hyper wealthy, but just wanted to save the club. There was a package, I think, put together in which each of the lenders was going to take a haircut. And then one of the lenders said, no, I want all of my money back. And it looked as if then things were starting to unravel. The good news is, on a short-term basis, the club's now been saved from administration. I think there's ongoing discussions between the football club and the local council with regards to a land sale for, I think it's a battery farm.
Yes, it is. Yeah,
that they're hoping to do. It looks like the council's level of opposition is starting to dissolve a bit, and if that goes through, then the proceeds could help the club, and I think we're in a far better position. Cali Thistle were losing 30 to 35 grand a week in 23-24. That's an awful lot of money given where they are in the Scottish football hierarchy, and they don't have the benefit of for want of a better phrase, a sugar daddy style owner who can just write off those losses every year, as we see at so many clubs dotted around the country.
Yeah, I think we should point out it's a battery factory, isn't it, Kieran, rather than a battery farm.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I mean,
yes.
We don't want thousands of protesters turning up expecting to see 10,000 chickens crammed into a tiny pen around the back of the away end. So that's good news, Kieran. Our last two stories take us to the northwest, Kieran, northwest of England, where all those biased referees come from. And the first one concerns, I think this is the first time we've mentioned this club, but the Liverpool Post have analysed the dealings of a club that's very far away from Everton, Liverpool, and indeed Tranmere in terms of finances.
Yes, and before we go into the story in more detail, I'd just like to give you a character reference in respect of the club owner, sort of club owner of Southport, a slippery character with an obvious and callous disregard for the truth.
Oh,
put that on your LinkedIn profile and see the job offers come flooding in.
Okay.
So this is Southport FC.
Sorry, Ken, were you quoting that? Was that your view of...
I am quoting that.
You are? Okay, from the Liverpool Post.
They're quoting that from the Liverpool Post.
Okay.
Yeah. And this had come, I think, from a legal case as well. There is something in the Merseyside area called the Big Help Project.
Yeah.
And the Big Help Project is a charity. Great. There's a lot of social deprivation in the Northwest.
Yeah.
I've lived there most of my life, just as there are in many other places of the country. So anything which is there to try to help people get back on their feet, rehabilitate themselves, give them opportunities, fantastic. We've done charity gigs because there's things that we're passionate about and we believe in. And we're hoping to be announcing one soon as well for another charity that we both feel does a fantastic job. And this Big Help Project went from being a relatively small charity to a much bigger one. And all of a sudden, the guy behind it is at number 10 Downing Street. His profile is raising and so on. And the Liverpool Post, which has done an amazing investigative piece of work here, has managed to identify that the Big Help has transferred £5.5 million to private companies, which just happen to be run by the person in charge of the Big Help Project and his partner. It looks as if they are related to, or one of them is related to, local Labour Party, as a councillor and so on. And then Southport have been acquired by the non-profit arm of the charity, given that charities aren't there to make profits.
Yeah.
That struck me as a little bit strange, rather than the charity itself. So it's certainly something which warrants further investigation. The Liverpool Post is it's a semi-private newspaper in the sense it's one of those things. It'll put out a couple of articles and the rest behind a paywall, but it's intriguing. Southport FC, you and I are both old enough to remember when they were part of the 92.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's a club which has had some tough times. It's nearly gone out of business on occasions, but it's still there. You do worry because if there's going to be an investigation into the charity, then what are the repercussions as far as the football club are concerned?
Well, talking of charities, Kieran, I'm going to piggyback off the back of that, and I can assure our listeners that we didn't rehearse this. Don't forget, in 2 weeks' time, I shall be halfway through that 63-mile walk from Spurs to Selhurst Park via every ground in London to raise money for the Lily Foundation. So any donations from our lovely listeners would be great. And you can do that. You can go to the Lily Foundation website. Lily Foundation are leading the fight against mitochondrial disease. You can go to their website and you can press my face. But that all seems a bit Alan Partridge. Go onto their website and press my face. Or you can text Kevin in block capitals. So text Kevin to 70560, and that will automatically donate £10. That'd be lovely. If you want to donate 20 or 30 or 5, then just put Kevin with the amount next to it. So I will be reminding everybody again next week and letting people know the itinerary. So if anybody wants to come and join me, there's lots of people joining me on the walk already, but it'd be lovely to see you on the way. But more important, to raise the money. So 70560 would be very kind of you. And talking of generous gestures, Kieran, Pep Guardiola, explain.
Yes, Pep Guardiola has given £10,000 to 60 to 70 members of the Manchester City backroom staff as a thank you for all of their efforts in helping him to be, in my view, the best coach on the planet, and to deliver trophy after trophy to the Etihad. We talk about the football industry sometimes being disconnected from reality. I think this is an incredibly generous gift by Pep Guardiola. I think it's a sign that he is in touch. Anybody that's ever listened to him or being in his company realises that he's an intense individual, but he genuinely does care, and he didn't have to do it. And people will say, well, we could easily afford it. Yeah, but he's done it.
Yeah,
There's other rich people in Manchester who take the view that they don't have to pay any tax, despite the fact being thousands of times richer than Pep Guardiola.
Yeah. Well done, Pep. And thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon. So it's not often I get the chance to say, well done, Pep. Little pat on the back for Pep there. Well done, Pep. Thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution as well, that'd be very kind of you. And that'll get you access to our chat community and our regular quizzes. Christmas is coming up. The Christmas quiz, Kieran, is always one of my favourite times of the year, I have to say. It's always very jolly, and I love the fact that people put Christmas jumpers on to join us. But you can do all that by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter X, and you can find us on our YouTube channel. And if you'd like to buy our new book, our old book, which is coming out on paperback very shortly, you can find details very soon on our website, priceoffootball.com. We'll be back on Tuesday with our regular questions pod. In the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, thank you as always, everybody that's in contact, everybody that's keeping me fully busy, especially over the last 24 hours. Listeners contacting me on Discord and WhatsApp and Twitter and so on. I try to reply as many as I can, genuinely. There's a variety of ways you can support the show, as Kevin rightly said. If you want an advert-free version for just £3 a month, then you can get that, I believe. There's another way you can support the show. That's to give us a review. It helps us with algorithms. It's a competitive market, the podcast market these days, and we're a very small operation compared to the behemoths and the banter pods which have arisen over the course of the last 12 months. But we try to hold our own as being niche as we can. By all accounts, it doesn't matter what you say in your review. So you could even say you would rather have the show presented by Pep Guardiola and Pepe Le Pew, who is one of my favourite Looney Tunes characters, hugely underrated, and his constant affection towards a Parisian cat is one of the great things of old school cartoons.
Do you know what? I would urge anybody of any age who may be baffled by Kieran's last statement there to Google Pepe Le Pew, which just essentially it was a randy skunk essentially.
Yes. We know a few of those.
We know a few. We do indeed know a few of those. But just the depth of imagination they used every week, because this poor little cat, who was a cat, they found a way to get the whitewash or white paint or tippet or whatever it was to fall on the cat in a perfect style to make the cat look like a skunk. And then we followed Pepe Le Pew's blatant attempts to try and get off with it. It was just... Actually, the way I describe it, you think, how on earth did that ever get made? But it is actually very funny. Also, a banter pod is great. You know how much I love Christmas, Kieran. I'm going to sign up for a Santa pod. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.